Now, our special guest has connections to Neverland, to the real Neverland. His name is Stewart Stern, and when my husband was on the West Coast doing Peter Pan, he met Stewart and came running home and said to me, "You will not believe it, but there is this amazing person with memories going way back to the time when James Barrie was still alive, still writing, and he became a famous screenwriter himself." And I'm not going to tell you too much because he's going to tell you much better than I can about his life. His family started Paramount Pictures. His cousin worked for MGM. And he even got something in the mail from James Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan. It's hard to believe that only just 100 years ago was the first time that anybody ever heard the words Peter Pan, because to us, they just seem to have existed forever, and maybe they did. So Stewart is here to talk about his own life, and I just want you to give him a Neverland welcome, because we are so lucky to have him. He is the screenwriter of Rebel Without a Cause and many, many other things. That film showed yesterday, and it's also showing tomorrow. And he told us the most wonderful things to watch for in the film that were actually connected to his connection to Peter Pan. So here is Stewart Stern.
Dear old pirate song from Peter Pan. This is a little statuette of Peter Pan, of Betty Bronson as Peter Pan, that I used to see on my uncle's desk at his office at Paramount in New York. There was a big, big building there called the Paramount Building, and the theater was downstairs, and all the offices of the big people were upstairs. And he had this on his desk, and every time I had to go there and inhale his cigar smoke, I would have my eyes on this and say, someday, someday, this will be mine. And it's mine, it's mine. So it has a long history. It always begins with a writer. Sir James Matthew Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, was a very small Scotsman, barely taller than a child, with a very large head, deep, melancholy eyes, a mustache to cover his shyness, and a pipe that made everyone cough. He rarely smiled, but he could wiggle his ears, and he mainly trusted children and certain Newfoundland dogs of his acquaintance, whom he would one day roll up into Nana. There were those 5 little boys in Kensington Gardens that he fell in love with, and the Davies boys, whom he wisely treated as his superiors, and grew so close to that in a way he stole them, even as Peter Pan stole the Darling children, and they made up Peter's story together. It was born as a game they played at Barry's country house, and it just kept making itself up as he and his boys played it, sometimes this way, sometimes that way, and that's how Barry put it on the stage, and that's why it always keeps changing. That's the character of Peter, too. He won't stand still, never remembers what he did last, and he's always finding new adventures to hide his loneliness inside of. During rehearsals, Barry would sit huddled in the dark of the Duke of York's Theatre in London, excuse me, his great coat and bowler hat, watching the children with envy as they practiced flying around the stage, until one day someone asked him what the matter was. He said, "I should very much like to fly too." So they hoisted him up in the magical arrangement that helps you do it, and flew him around the stage in absolute ecstasy, bowler hat, pipe, great coat and all, twinkling like a firefly, until they finally sat him down. Barrie's favorite critic on opening night was a little boy whom he'd taken to the theater. And he asked him, what part of it did you like best when the final curtain came down? And the little boy said, oh, the part I liked best was tearing up my program into little bits and throwing them down on the people. And of all the reviews his play received, Barrie liked that one the most. In about 1920, my uncle Adolf Zucker, who started Paramount Pictures, decided to make the first movie of Peter Pan. He had to find the perfect Peter to please Mr. Barrie. So a nationwide search began all across America. Countless screen tests were made, and the best ones were taken to London on an ocean liner by the movie's director, Mr. Herbert Brennan, and by another uncle of mine, Mr. Albert Kaufman, who was Uncle Adolph's studio manager. These men would show the tests to Barrie for him to choose his favorite. And among the candidates was a tiny 17-year-old girl from New Jersey who had come to Hollywood to break into movies and who called herself Betty Bronson. She banged on every door at Paramount Studios until Mr. Brennan agreed to see her. And she told him that she was born to play Peter, she had to play Peter, she would play Peter, and so Mr. Brennan had no choice but to make a test. In a London screening room, the two Americans unreeled those tests for Barrie day after day. And to break up a long afternoon, Barrie invited them to his flat, overlooking the River Thames, for tea. They were awed to be at the home of such a famous man, a man great enough to be knighted by the king. Barrie left his guests in the big ingle nook by the fire where he wrote, to go and see about the tea. But while they waited in their straight-back chairs, saying very little, for the whistle of the kettle to come from the kitchen, there was such a long, alarming silence that they went exploring through the flat. And they finally found Barrie frozen at the kitchen door with his shoes in his hands and his face a mask of terrible guilt. "It's housekeeper's day off," Barrie said, "and I'm not allowed in the kitchen. Mrs. Porter absolutely forbids me to set foot in it." Uncle Al said, "Well, I'll go in, I'll make the tea." But Barrie said, no, she'll be able to tell. She puts things around, I have to move out of the way, and that gives her hints. So that was it for tea. The very next day, a telegram reached Uncle Adolph's desk in New York. It was from London. Betty Bronson chosen to play the role of Peter Pan. Signed, Barrie.